My name is Theodore Ashford. I'm 66 years old and my daughter-in-law informed me, didn't ask me, informed me that all 28 members of her family would be spending Christmas week at my house. She said they'd already bought plane tickets. She said I should be grateful for the opportunity to host such a large, loving family. She said it was the least I could do after everything my son had sacrificed for me. When I told her absolutely not, that I hadn't agreed to this, she laughed in my face and said it didn't matter what I wanted, because Marcus had already said yes, and it was his house too. So I smiled and said, fine, enjoy the house, because I won't be here. And 5 days before Christmas, while she was out buying decorations for a celebration I'd never approved, I locked my bedroom door, packed my bags, and disappeared to a place she'd never think to look. But to understand how we reached that breaking point, I need to take you back 5 years. 5 years to the month when my son Marcus married a woman named Simone, who viewed my 3-story Victorian home not as my sanctuary, but as a resource she was entitled to exploit. Let me tell you the whole story, because what happened that Christmas was simply the final explosion after years of accumulated resentment, boundary violations, and a systematic campaign to make me feel like a guest in my own home. I bought this house 32 years ago with my late wife Charlotte. We were both professors at the university, she in literature, I in history. The house was a fixer-upper in what was then an affordable neighborhood that has since become one of the most desirable areas in the city. We spent years restoring it, refinishing the original hardwood floors, repairing the intricate crown molding, converting the attic into a library where Charlotte graded papers and I wrote my books. Every room held memories of our life together. Charlotte died 7 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was swift and brutal, diagnosed in March, gone by July. Marcus was 33 at the time, already established in his career as a software engineer. He was devastated. We both were. Charlotte had been the emotional center of our small family. Without her, Marcus and I drifted somewhat. We still met for dinner once a month, still called each other regularly, but there was an absence we both felt keenly and didn't quite know how to fill. 2 years after Charlotte died, Marcus met Simone at a tech conference. She worked in project management at a competing firm. From what Marcus told me initially, she was ambitious, organized, and had clear plans for her future. When he introduced us 6 months into their relationship, I tried to be open-minded. Simone was polished and professional, the kind of person who spoke in bullet points and turned every conversation into an agenda. During that first dinner at a restaurant Marcus had chosen, Simone asked me detailed questions about my house. How many bedrooms? How many bathrooms? Square footage? When it was built? Estimated current value? At the time, I thought she was just making conversation, showing interest in my life. Marcus seemed pleased that we were talking. I didn't realize she was conducting an assessment, calculating the property's worth, planning its future use. They got engaged after dating for 14 months. The wedding was large and expensive, paid for primarily by Simone's parents, who apparently had significant wealth from commercial real estate investments. I contributed what I could, which Simone accepted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. During the wedding planning process, she'd occasionally make comments about how Marcus came from modest means, how it was lucky her family could afford to give them the wedding they deserved. The implication was clear. My son wasn't quite on her level financially, and she was doing him a favor by marrying him anyway. After the wedding, they moved into a luxury apartment downtown. For the first year of their marriage, things seemed fine. They visited occasionally. We'd have dinner. Simone would dominate the conversation with stories about her job, her social circle, her plans for their future. Marcus seemed happy, if somewhat quiet. I noticed he spoke less when she was around, but I attributed that to the dynamics of new marriage, the adjustment period. Then their financial situation changed. Simone's company went through restructuring. Her position was eliminated. She was unemployed for the first time in her adult life. According to Marcus, she took it hard. Her identity was wrapped up in her career, her title, her salary. Without that, she felt adrift. Marcus suggested she take time to figure out what she wanted to do next. She interpreted that as him not supporting her ambition. Their fights became frequent and heated. 3 months after losing her job, Simone still hadn't found new employment. Their expensive apartment was straining Marcus's salary alone. He came to me one evening looking exhausted. "Dad," he said, "we're having some financial difficulties. The apartment costs more than I can manage by myself. We're thinking about breaking the lease, but we'd have to pay penalties. I was wondering if maybe, just temporarily, we could stay with you, just for a few months while Simone finds work, and we save up for a new place." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to help my son, but because something about Simone made me cautious. The way she'd assessed my house during that first meeting, the way she talked about money and status, the way she seemed to view relationships as transactions. But Marcus was my only child. How could I say no? Of course, I told him. "You can stay in the guest suite on the second floor. We'll make it work." That was my first mistake, not helping my son, but not establishing clear boundaries from the beginning, not putting timelines in writing, not discussing expectations explicitly. I assumed Marcus and I understood each other, that our relationship was built on mutual respect and consideration. I didn't account for Simone's very different understanding of how families should operate. They moved in 2 weeks later. The guest suite consisted of a large bedroom, a private bathroom, and a small sitting area. It was comfortable and private. I told them to treat it as their own space. I'd stay primarily on the first floor and in my own bedroom. The third-floor library would remain mine. We'd share the kitchen and living spaces with courtesy and communication. Simone smiled and agreed to everything, then immediately began redecorating the guest suite without asking, painting walls and replacing furniture I'd carefully chosen. When I gently mentioned that I wished she'd consulted me before making changes, she looked at me like I was being ridiculous. "Theodore, we're living here now. We need to make it feel like home. You can't expect us to live in a space that feels like a hotel room." But it wasn't her space to change. It was my house that I was generously sharing. That distinction seemed lost on her. The boundary violations started small. Simone would use my kitchen when I was cooking, spreading her ingredients and dishes everywhere without asking if it was a good time. She'd invite friends over without mentioning it to me, so I'd come home to strangers in my living room. She'd move my belongings, books I was reading, or papers I was working on, because they didn't fit her aesthetic vision for the space. Each time I raised an objection, she'd make me feel like I was being petty or unwelcoming. "It's just a book, Theodore. I moved it to your room so the living room would look nicer." Or, "I'm sorry. I thought you'd be happy I was entertaining. Isn't that what families do?" She weaponized the concept of family, using it to guilt me into accepting behavior I found intrusive and disrespectful. Marcus, caught between his wife and his father, consistently took the path of least resistance. When I'd mention my concerns to him privately, he'd sigh and say, "Dad, can we not make this a big deal? Simone's adjusting to living here. Give her time. Cut her some slack." But how much slack was I supposed to cut? At what point did consideration for her adjustment become disregard for my comfort in my own home? The few months they'd promised to stay stretched to 6 months, then a year. Simone found a new job, but it paid less than her previous position. They were saving money, Marcus assured me, but it was taking longer than expected. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that my son was being honest with me, but I started noticing things. Simone's expensive clothes, her regular salon appointments, the designer handbags she'd show off to her friends when they visited my house. They were saving money by living with me for free, then spending it on luxuries. I tried to have a conversation with Marcus about finances, about contributing to household expenses, about setting a firm timeline for moving out. He got defensive. "Dad, you know we're struggling. We're doing our best. I can't believe you're trying to charge us rent. You're my father. Family helps family, but family also respects family. Family doesn't take advantage. Family doesn't overstay, and then act entitled to the hospitality." Year 2 of their temporary stay brought new invasions. Simone decided my living room furniture was outdated and embarrassing. She started slowly replacing pieces without asking. A new couch appeared one day. When I asked about it, she said my old one was falling apart and she'd done me a favor by replacing it. The old couch had been fine. It was comfortable and held memories of Charlotte curling up with books. But Simone didn't care about my memories. She cared about her vision for the space. She threw away Charlotte's belongings that I'd kept in small ways throughout the house. A favorite mug, a shawl draped over a chair, framed photos she deemed too prominent. When I discovered what she'd done, I was angrier than I'd been in years. Those were my wife's things, I told her. You had no right. Simone rolled her eyes. Theodore, Charlotte's been dead for years. It's not healthy to turn your house into a shrine. You need to move on. As if she had any authority to tell me how to grieve my wife. That incident led to our first major confrontation. I told Simone that if she couldn't respect my home and my belongings, perhaps it was time for them to find their own place. She went to Marcus and cried. Told him I was being cruel to her, that I'd yelled and said terrible things. Marcus, having only heard her version, came to me upset. Dad, how could you talk to her like that? She's trying to help you. She cares about you. I tried to explain what had actually happened, but Simone had gotten to him first with her narrative. I was the unreasonable one, the difficult father-in-law, the man who couldn't appreciate his daughter-in-law's efforts. After that, I started documenting everything. I kept a journal of incidents, dates, times, what happened, witnesses, if any. I photographed my belongings before leaving the house, so I'd know if anything was moved or discarded. I kept copies of household bills showing I paid everything, while they contributed nothing. I didn't know what I'd do with this documentation, but instinct told me I'd need evidence eventually. Year 3 brought the most invasive change yet. Simone announced she was converting my third-floor library into a home office for herself. She'd taken a new job that allowed remote work and needed a dedicated professional space. The library that Charlotte and I had created together. The room where I'd written 3 books. The space filled with first editions I'd collected over 40 years. Simone wanted to clear it out and turn it into a corporate workspace. I said absolutely not. That was my private space, the one room I'd explicitly kept for myself. Simone didn't accept that answer. She went to Marcus and framed it as me preventing her from advancing her career. Marcus tried to convince me to compromise. Dad, she just needs one room. You have the whole house. Can't you work in your bedroom? It's not about the physical space, I tried to explain. It's about her taking over every inch of my home without regard for my wishes. But Marcus didn't want to hear it. His marriage was apparently more important than his father's well-being, so Simone took over the library anyway. While I was out one day, she hired movers to relocate most of my books to the basement. She set up her desk and equipment. She changed the locks on the door. When I came home and discovered what she'd done, I stood in the doorway of my violated sanctuary and felt something crack inside me. This wasn't my home anymore. I was just an inconvenient occupant of space that Simone had claimed as hers. I went to stay with my colleague James for 3 days. I needed distance to think clearly. Marcus called repeatedly, leaving messages saying I was overreacting, that Simone was willing to apologize if I'd just come home and talk. But I didn't want an apology that was just words. I wanted my home back. I wanted my son to see what his wife was doing. I wanted acknowledgement that I had rights as the homeowner. When I returned, there was a family meeting. Simone, Marcus and I sat in what used to be my living room. Simone delivered what was clearly a prepared speech about how we all needed to communicate better, how living together required compromise from everyone, how she understood I was attached to the past, but we needed to think about the future. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She positioned herself as the reasonable mediator while painting me as the inflexible old man clinging to memories. Marcus bought it completely. Dad, he said, I think Simone has some valid points. We're all under stress living together. Maybe we need to establish some house rules that work for everyone. Rules. In my own house. Rules that would be voted on democratically, giving Simone equal say in decisions about my property. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said I needed time to think. I retreated to my bedroom, the one space Simone hadn't yet colonized, and tried to figure out my options. I consulted with a real estate attorney named Patricia Gomez, who'd helped me with the deed when Charlotte passed. Patricia, I explained everything, the 5-year occupation, the lack of rent payments, the systematic takeover of my space, the emotional manipulation. What are my legal rights? Patricia was straightforward. As the sole owner, you can give them notice to vacate. 30 days is standard. They have no legal claim to the property, but she warned me this would likely destroy my relationship with Marcus, possibly permanently. That stopped me. Could I risk losing my only child? Marcus was all I had left of Charlotte. If forcing Simone out meant Marcus would choose her over me, could I live with that? Patricia saw my hesitation. "Theodore," she said gently, "you have to decide what's worth more, your peace and autonomy, or a relationship with a son who allows his wife to mistreat you. That's not a father's decision to make lightly. Go home, think about it. If you decide to proceed, I'll handle the paperwork." I went home but didn't mention the legal consultation. Instead, I tried a different approach. I sat down with Marcus alone and spoke from the heart. "Son," I said, "I love you. You're the most important person in my life. But the last 3 years have been extremely difficult for me. I don't feel like I have a home anymore. I feel like a guest who's merely tolerated. And I need you to really hear this. Your wife is taking over my life, and you're letting it happen." Marcus listened, but his response was defensive. "Dad, you're being dramatic. Simone's not that bad. She's just trying to make the best of a difficult situation. We're all trying to make it work." I asked him to name one thing I'd done that was unreasonable, one boundary I'd enforced that was truly unfair. He couldn't. Instead, he said, "You're just not used to having people around anymore. You've been alone too long. This is good for you, having family in the house." That statement revealed how little Marcus understood. I wasn't alone by choice. I was alone because Charlotte died. And filling the house with people who didn't respect me wasn't healing that loneliness. It was compounding it, making me feel isolated and unseen in a house full of others. But explaining this to Marcus felt futile. Simone had already framed the narrative. I was the problem. My inability to adapt was the issue, not her systematic colonization of my home. Year 4 brought escalating tensions. Simone started inviting her family to visit. At first, it was just her parents for a weekend, then her siblings, then cousins. My house became a hotel for her extended family, none of whom asked my permission or showed any appreciation for the hospitality. They'd arrive expecting meals prepared, beds made, entertainment organized. And Simone would volunteer my labor without asking. "Theodore will drive you to the airport. Theodore will pick up groceries for dinner. Theodore doesn't mind sleeping on the couch so you can have his room." I minded very much. But every objection was met with incredulity. "You won't give up your bed for family? You can't drive someone to the airport? What kind of person are you?" Simone's family adopted her perspective. They treated me like hired staff in my own home. They'd leave messes expecting me to clean up, use my things without asking, make demands on my time and space. And if I showed any frustration, I was the ungracious host. The worst incident involved Simone's mother, Barbara, who stayed for 2 weeks. Barbara was a woman accustomed to getting her way. She reorganized my entire kitchen to suit her preferences. She threw away food I'd bought because she didn't approve of my choices. She invited her friends to my house for her book club without mentioning it to me. I came home one afternoon to find 12 women in my living room using my furniture, drinking my wine, looking at me with annoyed expressions when I walked through my own front door. When I asked Barbara to please consult me before making plans in my home, she told me I was being inhospitable, that in her family guests were treated like royalty, that she was disappointed in how her daughter's father-in-law conducted himself. Simone backed her mother completely. "Theodore," she said, "my mum is trying to help. Maybe you should be grateful instead of critical." "I'm grateful for many things," I responded, "but being taken over by your relatives isn't one of them." That confrontation led to another family meeting. This time Simone had her parents present via video call. It was an intervention, essentially. 4 people telling me all the ways I was failing to be a good family member, how I was too rigid, too attached to material things, too unable to adapt to changing circumstances. Barbara actually said, "Theodore, you're going to end up alone if you keep pushing people away like this." The irony was staggering. I wasn't pushing anyone away. They had invaded my space and were now acting offended that I wanted boundaries. Marcus sat silent through most of it. When I looked at him pleadingly, hoping he'd defend me or at least acknowledge my perspective, he looked away. That's when I knew I'd lost my son. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. Simone had successfully positioned herself as the victim and me as the villain, and Marcus, whether through genuine belief or simple conflict avoidance, had accepted that narrative. After that meeting, I started making plans. Quiet plans that I didn't share with anyone. I contacted Patricia again and told her I was ready to proceed with eviction. She prepared the documents, but suggested I wait until after the holidays. It'll be harder for them to claim you're being cruel if you get through one more Christmas together, she advised. Then in January, you serve notice. Give them 30 days. If they don't leave, we file for formal eviction. I agreed to wait. But that decision became complicated when Simone made her announcement in October. We were having dinner, one of the increasingly rare times we ate together, when she said casually, "Oh, I meant to tell you both. My whole family is coming for Christmas. Everyone, parents, siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins. About 28 people total. Isn't that exciting? We're going to have a real family Christmas for once." I put down my fork. "You invited 28 people to my house without asking me?" She looked genuinely confused by my question. "It's not just your house, Theodore. Marcus lives here too. And we agreed, didn't we, Marcus?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Simone mentioned it might be nice to host everyone. I said it sounded fine." "You said it sounded fine," I repeated. "You agreed to host 28 people in my home without discussing it with me first?" Simone interrupted before Marcus could respond. "Theodore, don't be dramatic. It's Christmas. Time for family. They'll mostly stay in hotels. We'll just use your house for meals and gatherings. Use my house. Like it was a community center available for event rental." I felt that old familiar anger rising. The anger I'd been suppressing for 4 years. "No," I said, "absolutely not. I did not agree to this. The answer is no." Simone laughed. Actually laughed at me. "Oh, Theodore, it's happening whether you like it or not. Everyone's already bought plane tickets. Hotels are booked, food is ordered. You can either be pleasant about it or you can be difficult. But either way, we're having Christmas here." The sheer audacity of that statement took my breath away. She'd made plans involving my property, my space, my holiday, without my consent, and was now telling me I had no choice but to accept it. I looked at Marcus. "Are you hearing this? Are you okay with your wife telling me what's happening in my own house?" Marcus looked miserable but said, "Dad, it's already arranged. Can't you just go along with it? It's 1 week. Then everything goes back to normal. Back to normal. As if our normal wasn't already dysfunctional. As if one more violation would somehow be acceptable because it was temporary." I stood up from the table. "I need to think about this." Simone called after me as I left the room. "There's nothing to think about. It's decided." That was my breaking point. The moment where years of accumulated resentment crystallized into absolute clarity. I would not host 28 of Simone's relatives. I would not smile and play gracious host while being steamrolled. I would not spend my Christmas being treated like an inconvenient fixture in my own home. But I also knew I couldn't simply refuse and expect Simone to respect that. She'd proven over 4 years that my wishes meant nothing to her. She'd proceed with her plans regardless of my objections. So I needed to remove the one element she was counting on. Me. If I wasn't there, she couldn't use my house as her personal venue. She'd have to deal with 28 relatives without the home she'd promised them. I started planning my exit immediately. I researched small towns within driving distance that had vacation rentals available. I found a cabin in the mountains 2 hours away, available for the entire month of December. Remote, peaceful, completely off anyone's radar. I booked it under a fake name, paid cash, left no digital trail. Then I started quietly moving things I cared about. A few photos of Charlotte, my father's pocket watch, some books I couldn't replace. I moved them gradually to a storage unit I rented across town. Patricia helped me prepare documents protecting my property during my absence. She created an affidavit stating that Simone and Marcus did not have my permission to host guests in my home while I was gone. That any damage or liability would be their responsibility. That this would be documented as further evidence of their overstaying their welcome. If they proceeded with the Christmas gathering, it would strengthen my case for eviction. I told no one about my plans, not Marcus, not Simone, not even my closest friends. The fewer people who knew, the better. I wanted to disappear completely, to vanish without warning, to leave Simone scrambling to explain to her 28 relatives why the homeowner wasn't there for the celebration she'd promised. 5 days before Christmas, on a Tuesday morning, I executed my plan. Simone had gone shopping for decorations and last-minute supplies for her big event. Marcus was at work. I had the house to myself. I packed 2 suitcases with clothes and essentials. I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen counter, where Simone would find it when she returned. The note read, "Simone and Marcus, I will not be hosting your Christmas gathering. I did not consent to this plan. I have gone away for the holidays and will return in January. Do not attempt to contact me. Do not bring guests into my home. This is formal notice that your temporary stay has concluded. When I return, we will discuss your move-out timeline. Theodore." Next to the note, I left Patricia's card and a copy of the affidavit. I wanted them to understand this wasn't an empty threat. This was the beginning of legal action if they didn't respect my boundaries. Then I locked my bedroom door with a new lock I'd installed, took my bags, got in my car and drove away from the house I'd lived in for 32 years. The drive to the cabin was cathartic. Every mile between me and that house felt like shedding weight. I'd spent 4 years feeling trapped, invaded, disrespected. Now suddenly I was free. Free from Simone's manipulations, free from Marcus's disappointing complicity, free from the constant violation of my space and peace. I turned off my phone completely. Whatever chaos was unfolding back home, I didn't want to know about it yet. I needed this time to myself. The cabin was perfect, small, cozy, nestled in pine trees with a view of snow-covered mountains. There was a fireplace, a fully stocked kitchen, comfortable furniture. For the first 3 days, I did nothing but read, cook simple meals, and sit by the fire. I didn't think about Marcus or Simone. I didn't think about Christmas or family obligations. I just existed in peaceful solitude. On the 4th day, Christmas Eve, I finally turned on my phone. It exploded with messages. 63 missed calls, 48 text messages, 27 voicemails. I scrolled through them slowly, observing the progression of emotions without letting them affect me. The first messages from Simone were furious. "Where are you? Come back immediately. This is unacceptable." Then desperate. "Theodore, please. My whole family is coming. You're ruining Christmas." Then manipulative. "How can you do this to Marcus? He's devastated. His father abandoning him on Christmas." Marcus's messages followed a similar pattern, but with more guilt-tripping. "Dad, please call me back. We need to talk about this." Then, "I can't believe you just leave without warning. Simone is beside herself." Finally, "This is really hurtful. I thought you were better than this." But not once did either of them acknowledge why I'd left. Not once did they take responsibility for years of boundary violations. They were victims in their own narrative, and I was the villain for finally saying enough. I listened to a few voicemails. Simone's voice progressed from controlled anger to barely restrained hysteria. In one message, she threatened to break into my bedroom to use it for guests. In another, she promised I'd regret this, that I was destroying my relationship with my son forever. The later messages included her family members, her mother's voice dripping with judgment. "Theodore, this is incredibly selfish. Simone went to so much trouble. Her father, more businesslike. We need to discuss compensation for the disruption this has caused to our family's plans." Compensation. They wanted me to pay them because I wouldn't let them use my house without permission. The audacity was almost impressive. I saved all the messages. They'd be useful evidence when Patricia filed the eviction paperwork. Then I turned my phone off again. They didn't deserve responses. They didn't deserve explanations. They'd proven for 4 years that my words meant nothing to them. Now they could experience consequences. I learned later what happened during that Christmas week. A colleague from the university, Professor James Wickham, had a daughter who worked at one of the hotels where Simone's family had reservations. Through that connection, I heard how the holiday unfolded. When Simone's relatives started arriving on Christmas Eve, they expected to go to my house for a welcome dinner and accommodation for those who hadn't booked hotels. Instead, they found Simone in a panic. Marcus trying to apologize and no host home available. There was immediate confusion and anger. People had traveled across the country based on Simone's promises. She'd told them they'd stay in a beautiful Victorian house with plenty of room, that there would be home-cooked meals and traditional celebrations. Instead, many had to scramble for last-minute hotel rooms at inflated holiday prices. Others ended up sharing rooms that were too small, sleeping on hotel room floors, dealing with the logistics nightmare of hosting 28 people across multiple locations. Simone tried to salvage the situation by using my house anyway for daytime gatherings, but without me there, many family members felt uncomfortable. The grandmother apparently refused to enter, saying it was disrespectful to use someone's home without their presence or permission. Several others agreed. It created a rift in the family gathering before it even began. The Christmas dinner Simone had planned fell apart completely. She'd assumed I'd cook or at least provide a kitchen and space. Without my involvement, she had to find restaurants that could accommodate a large party on Christmas Day. Most places were closed or fully booked. They ended up at a mediocre buffet restaurant where the food was overpriced and underwhelming. Several relatives complained loudly about the quality, comparing it unfavorably to past family Christmases. Throughout the week, the questions kept coming. Where was the homeowner? Why wasn't he there? Why had Simone promised something she couldn't deliver? Some family members started asking pointed questions about Simone and Marcus's living situation. How long had they been staying with his father? Were they paying rent? Why were they still there after several years? The answers painted an uncomfortable picture of grown adults taking advantage of an elderly relative. Simone's sister, Angela, who apparently had never liked her much, was particularly vocal. She told other family members that this was typical Simone behavior, over-promising, using other people's resources, playing victim when things went wrong. Angela revealed that several family members had distanced themselves from Simone over the years because of similar incidents. That I wasn't the first person Simone had taken advantage of, just the most recent. By the day after Christmas, half the family had gone home early. The week-long celebration Simone had envisioned lasted barely 3 days. Her parents, humiliated by the situation, had harsh words with her about responsibility and honesty. Her father, according to my source, told her directly that she'd brought this on herself by overreaching, that she'd hurt her relationship with her family by dragging them into a situation she didn't control. Marcus, caught in the wreckage, finally started seeing things clearly. Several relatives pulled him aside to ask if he was okay living with someone who'd created this mess, who'd manipulated him into thinking her behavior was normal, who'd systematically alienated him from his father. One uncle told him bluntly that he seemed like a hostage in his own marriage, always apologizing for his wife, always making excuses, never standing up for what was right. Meanwhile, I spent Christmas Day in peaceful solitude. I cooked myself a small feast, nothing elaborate, just foods I enjoyed. I watched classic movies. I called a few old friends and had genuine conversations about life and philosophy and the books we were reading. I felt no guilt, no regret, no obligation to people who'd never shown me consideration. For the first time in 4 years, I experienced a holiday without tension, manipulation, or feeling like an unwelcome presence in my own life. I stayed at the cabin for the full month I'd rented it. I needed that time to decompress, to remember who I was, before becoming a doormat in my own home. I read 17 books. I wrote extensive journal entries processing 4 years of accumulated trauma. I hiked mountain trails and stood at overlooks, feeling like I could breathe fully for the first time in years. I also used that time to finalize my plans with Patricia. We communicated through encrypted email. She sent me the eviction notice documents. I reviewed them and approved. She prepared to serve them the day I returned. We also discussed potential complications. What if Marcus contested? What if Simone refused to leave? What if they caused damage to the property in retaliation? Patricia had strategies for all these scenarios. I just needed to stay strong and follow through. On New Year's Day, I drove back to the city. I didn't go straight home. First, I stopped at Patricia's office to sign final documents. Then I went to James's house to catch up and get a more complete picture of what had happened during my absence. James told me Marcus had called him twice, asking if he'd heard from me, if he knew where I was. James had honestly said no, which was true. He didn't know my exact location, only that I was safe and needed space. James also shared his own observations about my situation. He said he'd seen me declining over the past few years, becoming quieter, more withdrawn, less like myself. He'd assumed it was grief over Charlotte, but now he understood it was the toxic living situation. Several colleagues had noticed the same thing. They'd all been worried but hadn't wanted to intrude. James apologized for not speaking up sooner. I finally returned home on January 2nd at 3 in the afternoon. I deliberately chose a time when Marcus would be at work, but Simone would likely be home. I wanted to see her reaction firsthand. I wanted her to understand that I'd returned empowered, not defeated, that her manipulation no longer had any hold over me. When I walked through the front door, Simone was in the living room on her laptop. She looked up and her face went through several expressions. Relief, then anger, then calculation. "Theodore," she said, standing up. "Where have you been? We need to talk." I set down my bag calmly. "No, Simone, you need to listen. I'm not discussing anything. I'm informing you that you and Marcus have 30 days to vacate my property." She laughed, that same dismissive laugh she'd used when I objected to the Christmas plan. "You can't evict us. We live here. We have rights." "Actually, you don't." I pulled out copies of Patricia's documents. "You've been guests in my home. You've overstayed your welcome. You've repeatedly violated boundaries. And now you have 30 days to leave, or I proceed with formal legal eviction." Simone's face turned red. "You cruel, spiteful old man. We've been taking care of you. We've been keeping you company. And this is how you repay us, by throwing us out." I almost laughed at the rewriting of history. "You've been taking care of yourselves at my expense, living rent-free while taking over every aspect of my home. That ends now." She started to argue, to threaten, to guilt-trip, but I held up my hand. "I don't care what you have to say. The legal documents have been served. Patricia will be here at 5 p.m. to officially deliver them and witness that you've been notified. I suggest you start looking for apartments. And Simone, if you cause any damage to my property out of spite, I will pursue legal action. Consider yourself warned." I walked past her to my bedroom, unlocked the new lock and entered the one space that remained untouched. It felt like a sanctuary. I'd reclaimed my power, my agency, my home. Whatever happened next, I was no longer a passive victim in my own life. Patricia arrived exactly at 5 p.m. as promised. She was all business, professional and calm. She served the formal eviction notice to Simone, who'd called Marcus home from work. Marcus looked devastated. "Dad," he said, "we can work this out. Let's not involve lawyers. Let's talk like family." "But family talks before making decisions," I replied. "Family respects each other. We haven't had that in 4 years. This is the consequence." The next 30 days were tense but necessary. Marcus and Simone searched for apartments, but struggled to find anything they could afford. Their lifestyle had expanded to match living rent-free. Now, facing actual market rates, they realized how much they'd been depending on my subsidizing them. Simone tried several times to negotiate. Could they stay 60 days instead of 30? Could I help with their deposit? Could I reconsider entirely? The answer to everything was no. I'd given them 4 years of flexibility. I'd sacrificed my peace, my health, my happiness for their convenience. That generosity had been exploited, not appreciated. I had nothing left to give them. Patricia advised me to have no direct conversations with them. Everything went through her. That removed the emotional manipulation that Simone excelled at. She couldn't cry or guilt-trip a lawyer who dealt with facts, not feelings. On day 28, 2 days before the deadline, they finally found an apartment. It was smaller than they wanted, in a less desirable neighborhood than they preferred, but it was what they could afford. Marcus asked if I'd help them move. I declined. I'd helped enough. They needed to handle this themselves, to feel the full weight of independence they should have embraced years ago. Moving day arrived. I stayed in my room while they loaded their belongings. I didn't want a dramatic farewell scene. I didn't want Simone's tears or Marcus's guilt trips. I wanted them gone so I could begin reclaiming my house. When I finally heard the front door close for the last time, I waited 10 minutes before emerging. The silence was profound and beautiful. They'd left the guest suite in reasonable condition, surprisingly. Perhaps Patricia's warning about pursuing damages had been taken seriously. But the rest of the house needed work. Simone had changed so much over 4 years. I spent the next 3 months slowly restoring it, repainting walls to Charlotte's original colors, finding furniture similar to what Simone had discarded, retrieving my books from the basement and returning them to the library. Each change erased Simone's presence and restored my connection to Charlotte, to my past, to myself. Marcus and I didn't speak for 6 months. He'd tried calling several times initially, but I didn't answer. I needed complete separation to heal, to process 4 years of trauma, to remember who I was before becoming a doormat. Patricia had advised minimal contact anyway, in case legal issues arose, though none did. Marcus and Simone moved out cleanly, if resentfully. The first contact came in July. Marcus sent a letter, actual handwritten pages, not an email or text. He wrote about his marriage struggles, how Simone blamed him for losing the free housing, how she'd become critical and cold, how he'd started seeing a therapist who was helping him recognize patterns of manipulation he'd missed, how the therapist had asked him to describe his relationship with his father before Simone, and Marcus realized how much had changed. He wrote, "Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I haven't earned that. I'm writing because my therapist suggested I acknowledge what I did. I chose my wife's comfort over your well-being repeatedly. I let her take over your home, your space, your peace. I made excuses for her behavior when I should have stopped it. I prioritized avoiding conflict with her over protecting you. That was wrong. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing specific incidents he now saw differently: the library takeover, the disposal of Charlotte's things, the Christmas ambush. Each memory now viewed through the lens of realization rather than rationalization. He didn't ask to reconcile, didn't request anything from me, just acknowledged his failures and expressed genuine remorse. I read the letter 3 times. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to tell him I understood, to rebuild our relationship, but another part, the part that had been hurt deeply, needed more than words. I needed evidence of sustained change. So I wrote back a brief note. "Marcus, I received your letter. I appreciate the acknowledgement. I'm not ready for more than this yet, but I wish you well in your therapy journey. When you've done more work, perhaps we can talk. Dad." Over the following months, Marcus sent occasional updates. He and Simone were in couples therapy. It wasn't going well. Simone resisted accepting responsibility for her behavior patterns. She continued to frame herself as the victim who'd been treated unfairly. The therapist had noted this was characteristic of narcissistic personality tendencies. Marcus was facing the reality that his wife might not be capable of the change necessary for a healthy relationship. By month 9, Marcus and Simone separated. He moved into his own small apartment. The separation was apparently his decision, a line he'd finally drawn after years of having no boundaries. He wrote that living alone was simultaneously lonely and liberating, that he was learning to make decisions without checking if they'd upset Simone, that he was rebuilding his sense of self. Around that time, I was ready to see him. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop near the university. Marcus looked older, tired, but also somehow lighter. We talked carefully at first, avoiding heavy topics, just catching up on basic life updates. Then Marcus said he wanted to address everything directly. He'd been working with his therapist on making genuine amends. "Dad," he said, "I need you to know I understand what I did. For 4 years I watched my wife take over your life and I enabled it. I chose the easy path every single time, agreeing with her to avoid fights, making excuses for her to avoid accountability, asking you to compromise when I should have been protecting your boundaries. I turned you into the problem when she was the problem, and I'm deeply ashamed of that." I asked him what had finally made him see the truth. "The Christmas disaster," he said, "when her whole family turned on her, when they confirmed that her behavior was a lifelong pattern, when I couldn't blame you or make excuses anymore. I had to face that I'd married someone fundamentally selfish, someone who used people, and I'd let her use you for years." We talked for 3 hours that first meeting. I shared how the 4 years had affected me, the health issues from stress, the sense of losing myself, the grief of watching my son choose his wife's manipulation over his father's well-being. Marcus listened without defending himself. He took responsibility fully. That was what I needed to begin considering forgiveness. Rebuilding our relationship took time. We met monthly at first, then bi-weekly, then weekly. Gradually, trust returned. Marcus proved through actions, not just words, that he'd changed. He asked permission before suggesting anything. He respected boundaries. He acknowledged when he was wrong. He showed up consistently without drama or manipulation. These were basics, but they were basics he'd failed at for 4 years. A year after the eviction, Marcus asked if he could see the house again. He wanted to show me he could be in that space without trying to claim it or change it. I agreed cautiously. When he walked through, I watched his reactions carefully. He looked at the restored library and said, "I'm so sorry about what Simone did here. This space is beautiful. It should have stayed yours." He saw Charlotte's photos back in their proper places and smiled. "This is right. This is how it should be. Before leaving, Marcus said something that meant everything to me. Dad, thank you for standing up to us, for forcing consequences. If you'd continued enabling, I'd still be trapped in that toxic marriage. I'd still be the coward who chose comfort over character. You forcing me out literally saved me from a life of being Simone's enabler. At the time, I hated you for it. Now I understand it was the most loving thing you could have done. That reframed everything. My decision to evict them hadn't been selfish or cruel, though Simone had certainly painted it that way. It had been necessary self-protection that also inadvertently freed Marcus from a destructive relationship. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes family means enforcing boundaries. Sometimes the hardest choice is the healthiest one. Marcus and Simone eventually divorced. She contested everything, trying to get alimony despite their short marriage. Marcus's lawyer used documentation from our situation, showing her pattern of exploiting others financially. She got nothing. Last I heard, she'd moved back to her parents' home, working for her father's real estate company. She'd tried to contact Marcus several times, promising she'd changed. He'd blocked her completely. Growth. Today, 3 years after the eviction, my life is peaceful. The house is fully restored to its former state, a sanctuary again rather than a battleground. Marcus and I have dinner every Sunday, a tradition we've rebuilt with intention and care. He's dating someone new, a woman named Elena who's kind and respectful and understands boundaries. She's never once asked about my house's value or suggested changes to my space. When Marcus brought her to meet me, her first comment was how lovely the home was and how lucky he was to have grown up here. I've returned to my work, writing the 4th book I'd abandoned during those difficult years. The library, restored to its proper purpose, once again serves as my creative sanctuary. I host colleagues for dinner parties without worrying about someone taking over the event. I travel when I want, without concerning myself with what's happening at home in my absence. I exist in my space peacefully, the way a man my age should after working his whole life. The experience taught me invaluable lessons. That generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. That family can be toxic when respect is absent. That saying no is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. That consequences, though painful, are necessary for change. That you can love someone and still need to protect yourself from them. That it's never too late to reclaim your autonomy, your space, your peace. People sometimes ask if I regret how I handled things, if I wish I'd been more accommodating, more patient, more understanding. The answer is absolutely not. I gave 4 years of accommodation, 4 years of patience, 4 years of understanding. None of it changed Simone's behavior or Marcus's enabling. What changed everything was finally saying enough. Was disappearing that Christmas and letting them face the natural consequences of their disrespect. If anything, I regret not acting sooner. Regret tolerating the first year of boundary violations. Regret not evicting them after 2 years when the patterns were clear. Regret sacrificing my health and happiness for as long as I did. But I don't regret the final decision. That decision saved me, freed me, restored me to myself. For anyone reading this who's in a similar situation, trapped in their own home by people who take advantage, I want you to hear this clearly. You have the right to your space. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to say no, even to family, especially to family. Blood relation doesn't grant unlimited access to your home, your resources, your peace. Anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to manipulate you. Start documenting everything. Every violation, every broken promise, every manipulative conversation. Keep records, take photos, save messages. When you finally take action, this evidence will protect you from accusations of cruelty or unreasonableness. It will show the pattern clearly. It will validate your decision. Consult with professionals, lawyers who understand property rights, therapists who can help you process the emotional manipulation, friends who can offer outside perspective when you're too close to see clearly. You don't have to navigate this alone. There are people who will support you, who will confirm that what you're experiencing isn't normal or acceptable. And when you finally take action, expect backlash. Expect guilt trips. Expect accusations that you're destroying the family. Expect manipulation attempts disguised as reconciliation. Stay strong. Remember why you made the decision. Remember the toll the situation was taking on you. Remember that their discomfort with consequences doesn't obligate you to rescue them from those consequences. The people who truly love you will understand, will support your boundaries, will respect your decisions even if they're difficult. The people who don't understand, who demand you sacrifice yourself for their comfort, are showing you they value your resources more than your well-being. Believe them. Act accordingly. My name is Theodore Ashford. I'm 69 years old now. 3 years ago, my daughter-in-law announced that 28 of her relatives would take over my house for Christmas. When I said no, she laughed and said it didn't matter what I wanted, so I disappeared, left them to face the chaos they'd created without me there to fix it or enable it or suffer through it silently. That decision changed everything, ended 4 years of exploitation, forced my son to see the truth about his marriage, freed me from a toxic living situation that was literally killing me, and taught me that standing up for yourself, even when others call it selfish, is sometimes the most necessary and powerful choice you can make. I spent that Christmas alone in a mountain cabin. Best Christmas I'd had in 4 years. Complete peace, no drama, no manipulation, no walking on eggshells in my own existence. Just me, some good books, decent food, and the profound relief of reclaiming my autonomy. If that's selfish, then I'm proud to be selfish. Because the alternative, continuing to sacrifice myself for people who didn't value the sacrifice, would have destroyed me. 3 years later, I have my home back, my peace back, my son back, though our relationship required complete reconstruction on a foundation of actual respect rather than presumed obligation. And I have my self-respect back, the knowledge that I'm capable of protecting myself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when people I love become obstacles to my well-being, even when the easier path would be continuing to tolerate the intolerable. To anyone facing something similar, wondering if they have the strength to set boundaries with exploitative family members, let me assure you, you do. You have more strength than you realize. You deserve peace in your own home. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. And you deserve to live your remaining years on your terms, not according to someone else's entitled demands. Stand up for yourself. Document the situation. Seek professional help. Make the hard decision. Face the backlash. And on the other side, you'll find something precious that you may have forgotten existed. Peace. Real, genuine, lasting peace. The kind that comes from knowing you valued yourself enough to say enough. The kind that comes from choosing your well-being over others' comfort. The kind that comes from finally putting yourself first. That's my story, that's my truth, and if it helps even one person recognize their own situation and take action to protect themselves, then sharing it was worth it. Because nobody should have to live as a prisoner in their own home. Nobody should have to tolerate years of exploitation disguised as family. And nobody should feel guilty for finally saying no to people who never learned to hear it.